They thought it was just a massive Brahman bull, injured, quiet, oddly still. Nathan and Rebecca spotted him lying by the creek, his black hide gleaming under the Texas sun, breathing shallow. He didn't charge. He didn't run. He just stared. When the rescue team arrived, Dr. Emily Thornton leaned in to examine the bull. His muscles were like iron under her gentle touch. His breathing labored. Something wasn't right about how he positioned himself, so deliberate, so protective. "Let me just check under here," she murmured, carefully lifting one massive foreleg. What she found hidden beneath the bull's enormous chest made her face turn ghostly white. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp as she locked eyes with the magnificent creature. In that moment, she understood everything, and nothing would ever be the same. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The drought had transformed Big Bend country into a merciless landscape of cracked earth and withered vegetation. 3 months without significant rainfall had dried up most water sources, leaving only this stubborn creek where the massive bull had collapsed. The air shimmered with heat, even as the late afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. "We need to stabilize him quickly," Emily said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. 20 years as a rural veterinarian hadn't prepared her for this. "Nathan, get the emergency kit from my truck. Rebecca, call Sheriff Whitaker. This isn't a normal situation." The bull's condition was deteriorating by the minute. Deep lacerations crossed his muscular flanks, crusted with dried blood and dirt. One horn was partially broken, and his breathing came in labored bursts. Yet despite his injuries, the massive Brahman remained conscious, his dark eyes tracking every movement around him with unnerving intelligence. What had shocked Emily wasn't just the bull's injuries, but what he protected. Tucked beneath his massive frame, sheltered by his body heat, were 2 tiny calves, not Brahman like him, but something else entirely. They couldn't be more than a week old, with spindly legs and soft brown coats. One had managed to curl against the bull's chest, while the smaller one lay nearly motionless, except for the slight rise and fall of its tiny rib cage. "I've never seen anything like this," Rebecca whispered, staring at the unlikely trio. "Male bulls don't protect calves, especially not ones that aren't their own species." Nathan returned with Emily's medical kit. "How is this possible? Shouldn't he have trampled them?" Emily shook her head, filling a syringe with sedative. "That's what's so extraordinary. He's positioned himself to create a shelter around them. These wounds aren't fresh. He's been protecting these calves for days, maybe longer." Time was their enemy now. The sun would set in less than 2 hours, and the bull needed immediate attention that Emily couldn't provide in the field. But separating him from the calves could trigger aggression, or worse, resignation. Animals sometimes gave up when their purpose was removed. "We need to move quickly," Emily said, calculating doses in her head. "If we can get them all to the clinic before dark, they might have a chance. But this big fellow—" She ran her hand gently along the bull's muscular neck, feeling his pulse, too fast, too weak. "I'm not sure how much time he has left." The bull's eyes met hers again, with an awareness that sent chills down her spine. In 20 years of veterinary practice, Emily had never felt so clearly that an animal was communicating with her. His message seemed unmistakable: save them first. 3 years earlier, under the blazing lights of the San Antonio Livestock Exhibition, a legend was born. The massive Brahman bull with the distinctive black hide and unusually sharp intelligence had thrown 3 riders in under 8 seconds each, moving with a combination of raw power and calculated precision that left spectators breathless. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for El Corazon, the heart, undefeated for the 3rd straight year." The crowd roared as the bull paced the arena, head held high. Unlike other bulls who charged blindly or tired quickly, El Corazon seemed to study each rider, learning their patterns, adapting his strategy. Some whispered he was too smart for his own good. Ranch hands gave him a wide berth, crossing themselves when they thought no one was looking. Behind the chutes, Mason Powell watched with cold calculation in his eyes. At 65, Powell was a Texas institution, fifth-generation rancher, political kingmaker, and owner of the largest cattle operation in 3 counties. His weathered face rarely showed emotion, but tonight, as he watched El Corazon return to the holding pen, a smile creased his leathery features. "That animal's worth more than most people's homes," he remarked to no one in particular, chewing on an unlit cigar. "Breeding stock like that comes once in a generation." What Powell didn't say, what no one knew, was that El Corazon wasn't technically his property. The bull had been purchased through a shell company, one of many Powell used to hide his less reputable business ventures. The previous owner had been foreclosed on after refusing to sell to Powell directly, just another casualty of doing business in cattle country. "Mr. Powell, sir?" A ranch hand approached cautiously. "The transport's ready whenever you are." Powell nodded. "Make sure he's secured properly this time." "That animal's worth more to me alive than half my herd." What happened next would later be described as divine intervention by the more religious folk in Terrell County. As El Corazon was being loaded into the specialized trailer, a commotion broke out in the adjacent livestock area. A dairy cow, a gentle Jersey with caramel-colored hide, had somehow slipped her halter and wandered into the loading area, directly into El Corazon's path. Everyone expected carnage. A bull of his temperament should have charged immediately. Instead, El Corazon stopped, lowered his massive head, and regarded the cow with what observers would later swear was curiosity. The cow, seemingly unaware of the danger, approached the bull and nudged his flank with her nose. "Get that damn cow out of there!" Powell shouted. But before anyone could react, something extraordinary happened. The bull and cow touched foreheads, standing motionless for a long moment as the handlers watched in disbelief. "I ain't never seen nothing like that," whispered an old ranch hand named Luis Vasquez, crossing himself again, "like they're talking to each other." The moment was broken when Powell himself entered the loading area, cursing and waving his hat to separate the animals. The cow was led away, and El Corazon was finally loaded into the trailer. But something had changed. The bull that arrived at Powell Ranch that night was different, agitated, restless, refusing feed for days. 3 weeks later, El Corazon disappeared. The official story was that the bull had broken through a fence during a thunderstorm and was presumed dead in the rough country to the south. Powell claimed the insurance money and publicly moved on. Privately, he devoted considerable resources to tracking down his investment. The truth, known only to Luis Vasquez and a handful of others, was far stranger. El Corazon had indeed escaped, but not alone. The Jersey dairy cow, purchased by Powell on a whim after the encounter at the exhibition, had disappeared the same night. Security footage, viewed only by Powell and later destroyed, showed the bull methodically breaking through not just his own enclosure, but hers as well. Together, they had vanished into the vast ranch lands that stretched toward the Mexican border. For Emily Thornton, these events had passed without notice. She had her own history with the Powell family, though she rarely spoke of it. As a teenager, she had worked summers at the Powell Ranch, learning about animal husbandry from Mason Powell's father, Richard, a stern but fair man who treated his livestock with respect. "An animal gives its life for you," the elder Powell had told her once. "Least you can do is make sure that life is decent." Richard Powell had encouraged Emily's veterinary ambitions, even helped fund her first year of school. Mason was different. Where his father saw stewardship, Mason saw assets. When Richard died and Mason took over, Emily had witnessed the subtle but significant changes in how the ranch operated. More animals packed into smaller spaces, medications administered preventatively rather than as needed. Profit margins increasing while animal welfare standards declined. Emily had left to start her practice elsewhere, carrying Richard Powell's lessons with her. Now, as she ran a small but respected veterinary clinic serving 3 rural counties, she occasionally heard stories about Mason's operation, none of them good. What no one knew, not even Emily, was that Mason Powell had expanded beyond traditional cattle ranching. In the remote corners of his 20,000-acre property, he had begun breeding exotic and heritage cattle breeds, some legally, others in violation of import regulations and crossbreeding restrictions. The Jersey cow that had disappeared with El Corazon had been carrying valuable embryos, genetically modified heritage calves that represented a significant investment. For nearly 3 years, rumors circulated about a massive black bull occasionally spotted in the most remote areas of the county. Some claimed he had grown to mythic proportions. Others said he had gone feral, attacking other animals. Local ranchers set out hunting parties, but the bull remained elusive, a ghost in the vast landscape. What no one had reported until now was that he wasn't alone. "I still don't understand," Nathan said as he helped Emily prepare the sedative. "How does a rodeo bull end up here, protecting calves that aren't even his own species?" Emily checked the dosage carefully. Too little would be ineffective. Too much could kill the already weakened animal. "Animals form bonds we don't always understand," she replied, thinking of her own childhood dog who had once adopted an orphaned kitten. "Duh. But this is something different. This bull has been through hell to keep these calves alive." As if understanding her words, the massive bull shifted slightly, adjusting his position to better shield the calves from view. The movement clearly caused him pain, but he made no sound. "My grandpa used to say that God sometimes puts the gentlest souls in the roughest packages," Rebecca offered, kneeling a safe distance from the animals. "Maybe this old bull is proof of that." Emily nodded, approaching carefully with the syringe. "Whatever his story is, he deserves our help. Let's get them all out of here before—" A cloud of dust on the horizon cut her words short. A white pickup truck was approaching fast, Powell Ranch emblazoned on its door. "That's Mason Powell's truck," Emily said, her voice tight. "And something tells me he's not here to help." The bull, hearing the truck's engine, raised his massive head. For the first time since they'd found him, he made a sound, a low, rumbling bellow that wasn't threatening but protective. He was too weak to stand, too injured to fight, but the message was clear. He would die before he let anyone harm those calves. Emily looked from the approaching truck to the injured bull and made a decision. "Nathan, help me get these calves into my vehicle. Rebecca, prepare the trailer for the bull. We need to move fast." As Powell's truck grew closer, Emily placed her hand on the bull's broad forehead and leaned close to his ear. "I don't know what you've been through, old fellow," she whispered, "but I promise you this. Those calves will be safe. You have my word." For a moment, she could have sworn the bull understood every word. The sedative should have worked by now. Emily frowned, checking the bull's vital signs again as Nathan and Rebecca prepared the transport equipment. Despite receiving a dose that would have rendered most cattle unconscious within minutes, El Corazon remained stubbornly awake, his dark eyes focused on the calves as Emily's assistants carefully moved them into a padded carrier. "Easy, big guy," Emily murmured, stroking the bull's massive neck. "We're trying to help." The bull's muscles tensed beneath her touch as the smaller calf let out a weak cry. Despite his grievous injuries, El Corazon made a valiant attempt to rise, collapsing back to the ground with a pained grunt. The message was unmistakable. He wouldn't rest until he knew the calves were safe. "I've never seen anything like this," Nathan said, shaking his head in wonder. "It's like he thinks he's their parent." "That's exactly what he thinks," Emily replied. "And I'm starting to believe he is, in every way that matters." The white pickup truck skidded to a halt 30 yards away, sending up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured its occupants. When it cleared, Mason Powell was striding toward them, his weathered face set in grim lines. At 65, he moved with the energy of a much younger man, purpose in every step. Behind him, 2 ranch hands followed at a respectful distance. "That's far enough, Mason," Emily called, stepping protectively in front of the bull. "This animal needs immediate medical attention." Powell stopped, removing his Stetson to wipe sweat from his brow. His silver hair caught the late afternoon sun, giving him a deceptively distinguished appearance. "Dr. Thornton," he acknowledged with a tight nod. "Appreciate your concern, but that's my property you're handling there." "Your property?" Rebecca questioned, pausing in her work with the calves. "This bull's been wild for years from what I've heard." Powell's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "That bull escaped from my ranch 3 years ago. Valuable breeding stock. I've been tracking him ever since." Emily crossed her arms. "And the calves? Are you claiming those too?" "Everything on my land belongs to me," Powell replied smoothly. "My men will take it from here." Nathan stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, we're not on your land. This is state property bordering Big Bend National Park." Powell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Son, in this part of Texas, lines get a little blurry. Now step aside and let my men do their job." As the standoff continued, Emily returned to the bull's side, using the moment to examine him more thoroughly. The injuries were worse than her initial assessment had indicated. Multiple lacerations crossed his hide, some clearly infected. But it was the small, circular wound on his right flank that caught her attention, perfectly round, with characteristic powder burns around the edges. "This bull's been shot," she announced loudly, straightening to face Powell. "Recently, within the last week." Powell shrugged. "Feral bull causing damage to property. Any rancher would have done the same." "Most ranchers would have aimed to kill," Emily countered, "not wound and leave to suffer." Rebecca, who had been examining the smaller calf, suddenly called out, "Emily, you need to see this." Emily joined her, kneeling beside the carrier. Rebecca pointed to a distinctive marking on the calf's ear, not a traditional tag, but a small tattoo with a series of numbers and letters. "I've seen this before," Rebecca whispered. "When I worked with the Rare Breeds Conservation Program, this is a heritage breed identifier." Emily's mind raced, pieces falling into place. Mason Powell's unexplained interest in these particular calves, the bull's protective behavior, the unusual markings. "Time's wasting, Dr. Thornton," Powell called. "Those animals need attention, and I've got a trailer right here." Emily straightened, making a split-second decision. "Sheriff Whitaker is already on his way. Until he arrives, these animals stay with me." Powell's facade of politeness dropped. "Those animals are worth more than you make in a year, Doctor. Don't make this difficult." "Worth more?" Emily echoed. "Because they're rare breeds. Heritage cattle that might not be legally registered?" The silence that followed confirmed her suspicion. One of Powell's men shifted uncomfortably, looking away. "You don't know what you're talking about," Powell finally said, his voice dangerously soft. "I think I do," Emily replied, "and I think that's why this bull has been protecting these calves so fiercely. They're special, and for some reason he knows it." As if responding to her words, El Corazon made another attempt to rise, this time succeeding in lifting his massive head. The effort clearly cost him, but his eyes remained fixed on the calves, then shifted to Powell with unmistakable hostility. "That bull remembers you, Mason," Emily observed, "and not fondly." The tension was broken by the distant sound of a siren. Sheriff Jim Whitaker's cruiser appeared on the horizon, lights flashing against the darkening sky. Powell's expression hardened. "This isn't over, Emily. Not by a long shot." He turned to his men. "Back to the truck. We'll handle this through proper channels." As Powell retreated, Emily returned to the bull's side. El Corazon's breathing had become more labored, his massive chest rising and falling in an irregular rhythm. The sedative was finally taking effect, but his deteriorating condition worried her. They needed to move him soon, but the makeshift transport they'd prepared might not be enough. "He's fading," she told Nathan and Rebecca, "and I'm not equipped for this kind of emergency transport." The sheriff's cruiser pulled up alongside Emily's truck. Jim Whitaker emerged, adjusting his hat against the setting sun. At 59, the sheriff carried his authority with quiet confidence, his salt-and-pepper mustache and weathered face giving him an air of frontier wisdom. "Quite a situation you got here, Doc," he observed, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. "Powell seemed mighty interested in these animals." Emily briefed him quickly on the bull's condition and Powell's claims of ownership. "And you're saying this bull's been shot?" Whitaker asked, kneeling to examine the wound Emily pointed out. "Deliberately. Not a kill shot." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Like someone was hunting him. Tracking him." "Exactly." Emily hesitated, then added, "Sheriff, these calves have heritage breed markings, rare bloodlines that are strictly regulated. I think Powell's been running an illegal breeding operation." Whitaker's expression remained neutral, but Emily knew he was processing the implications. Mason Powell wielded considerable influence in the county. "That's a serious accusation, Doc." "I know, but it explains why he wants these calves so badly, and why this bull has been protecting them." The sheriff straightened. Decision made. "Let's get these animals to your clinic. Powell can file a formal claim if he wants, but for now, their welfare comes first." With the sheriff's help, they carefully loaded the sedated bull onto Emily's reinforced trailer. The process was painstaking, requiring all 4 adults working in coordination to move the massive animal without causing further injury. Throughout the process, even in his sedated state, El Corazon remained oriented toward the calves, his massive body shifting whenever they made sounds. As they secured the trailer doors, Rebecca asked the question they'd all been thinking. How did he end up with these calves in the first place? A rodeo bull doesn't just become a surrogate parent overnight. Emily had been wondering the same thing. The bond between the bull and calves went beyond ordinary animal behavior. There was history here, a story they were only beginning to uncover. "My daddy used to say that tragedy and kindness often walk hand in hand," Sheriff Whitaker offered, securing the last transport strap. "Maybe this old bull has seen his share of both." As they prepared to depart, Emily checked on the calves one last time. The larger one had improved slightly with the initial fluids she'd administered, but the smaller one remained worryingly weak. Both would need intensive care to survive. "We'll take it from here, old fellow," she said, patting the bull's flank through the trailer slats. "You've done your part." As if understanding her words, El Corazon exhaled deeply, some of the tension leaving his massive frame. For the first time since they'd found him, the great bull closed his eyes. Emily's veterinary clinic sat on the outskirts of Terlingua, a modest single-story building with a large barn conversion that served as treatment space for larger animals. By the time they arrived, night had fallen, bringing with it the merciful cool of a desert evening. Stars punctured the darkness overhead as they carefully unloaded the sedated bull into the largest stall. "Let's get him stabilized first," Emily directed her small team with practiced efficiency. "Nathan, start an IV line. Rebecca, prepare the surgical area. I need to examine those calves." The larger calf had improved during transport, becoming more alert and even attempting to stand. The smaller one, however, remained alarmingly weak, its breathing shallow and pulse thready. Emily worked methodically, administering fluids, antibiotics, and nutrients to both calves, all the while aware of the bull's massive presence in the adjacent stall. "They're severely dehydrated and malnourished," she explained to Sheriff Whitaker, who had followed them to the clinic. "But there's something else going on with the smaller one. I need to run some tests." While Rebecca monitored the calves, Emily turned her attention to El Corazon. The powerful sedative had finally taken full effect, allowing her to thoroughly clean and examine his wounds. The bullet wound concerned her most, showing signs of infection that could turn septic without intervention, but it was another discovery that left her momentarily speechless. Hidden beneath layers of dirt and dried blood on the bull's right shoulder was a distinctive brand, not the Powell Ranch mark as expected, but something else entirely. Emily carefully cleaned the area, revealing an intricate design she didn't recognize. "Sheriff," she called, "you should see this." Whitaker leaned in, squinting at the unusual brand. "That ain't no cattle brand I've ever seen. Looks almost like some kind of logo." "Exactly," Emily said, "which means Mason Powell was lying about ownership. This bull belonged to someone else." Nathan, who had been setting up monitoring equipment, joined them. "Maybe we can search brand registries. All livestock brands have to be registered with the state." "Good idea," Emily agreed. "But first, let's finish treating these wounds. This big guy's been through enough." As they worked, the clinic door swung open. Emily looked up, expecting one of her assistants, but instead found herself face to face with Margaret Thompson. At 74, Margaret was a local institution, a retired schoolteacher whose family had ranched in the area for 5 generations. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and despite the late hour, her eyes were sharp with curiosity. "Heard you brought in something special," Margaret said without preamble. "Whole town's talking about it." Emily sighed. Small-town news traveled fast. "It's a complicated situation, Margaret. A bull and 2 calves, all in rough shape." Margaret moved past her with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime around large animals. Despite her age, she navigated the clinic with sprightly steps, heading straight for the stall where El Corazon lay sedated. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, stopping short at the sight of the massive bull. "It's him, isn't it? The ghost bull folks have been talking about for years." "You know about him?" Emily asked, surprised. Margaret nodded slowly. "My grandson spotted him last winter up near Chisos Basin, said he was following something, protecting it." She moved closer, examining the unusual brand on the bull's shoulder. "Now that's interesting." "You recognize it?" Sheriff Whitaker asked. "I do indeed." Margaret's weathered fingers traced the air above the brand without touching it. "That's the Cortez Breeding Program mark. They specialized in heritage breeds down in Mexico. Went out of business about 4 years ago when the owner died." Emily and the sheriff exchanged glances. "How do you know about them?" Emily asked. "My late husband did business with them. They were renowned for their ethical breeding practices, preserving bloodlines that were disappearing from commercial ranching." Margaret moved toward the stall where the calves rested. "May I?" Emily nodded, and Margaret carefully examined the calves, paying particular attention to the tattoo in their ears. "Just as I thought," she said finally. "These are Piney Woods calves, one of the oldest heritage breeds in America, nearly extinct now. Their mama must have been full-blooded." "How would Mason Powell get involved with something like this?" Nathan asked. Margaret's expression hardened. "Mason always did have an eye for what belongs to others. When Cortez died, there were rumors that some of his best breeding stock disappeared before the official inventory was taken." Emily felt the pieces falling into place. "So Powell acquired these animals illegally?" "I'd bet my ranch on it," Margaret confirmed. "And if these calves are pure Piney Woods, they're worth a small fortune to the right collector." While they were talking, Rebecca had been researching on her tablet. "Found something," she announced, turning the screen toward them. "An article from 3 years ago about a raid on an illegal exotic animal importation ring." Several suspects were named, including unnamed associates of prominent local ranchers. The timing matches El Corazon's disappearance, Emily noted. A soft noise from the calves' stall drew their attention. The smaller calf had managed to stand, wobbling on uncertain legs. Its sibling nudged it supportively, both calves pressing against the stall divider, the side closest to the sedated bull. "They're looking for him," Rebecca said softly. "They know he's here." Emily made a decision. "Let's move their pen closer so they can see and smell him. That connection might help them recover." As they repositioned the calf's enclosure, Emily continued her examination of the smaller calf, drawing blood for testing. Something wasn't adding up about its condition compared to its sibling. "I think this little one might have a congenital heart defect," she told the others, listening through her stethoscope. "It would explain why it's weaker despite receiving the same care from the bull." "A defect that would make it worthless to someone like Powell," Margaret observed grimly. "But not to El Corazon," Emily added, watching as the calves settled down, visibly calmer now that they could see their protector. The clinic door opened again, this time admitting Luis Vasquez, one of the ranch hands they'd seen with Mason Powell earlier. He removed his hat nervously as he entered, eyes darting around the room before settling on Sheriff Whitaker. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, "about Mr. Powell and those calves." The sheriff exchanged glances with Emily before nodding toward his cruiser outside. "Let's talk in private." As they stepped out, Emily continued working, but her mind was racing. Luis had seemed uncomfortable during the confrontation at the creek. Perhaps he knew more than he'd let on. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Whitaker returned alone, his expression grim. "Luis has quite a story," he said, pulling Emily aside. "According to him, those calves' mother was a purebred Piney Woods cow that Powell acquired through questionable means. She was kept separate from the main herd, part of a small group of heritage breeds Powell has been crossbreeding illegally." "What about El Corazon?" Emily asked. "That's where it gets interesting. The cow that disappeared with El Corazon 3 years ago, she was the calves' mother. According to Luis, she helped the bull escape, almost like they planned it together. Powell was furious, especially because she was pregnant with embryos he'd paid a small fortune to implant." Emily looked back at the sedated bull, seeing him in a new light. "So he's been protecting the mother and then her calves all this time?" "Looks that way. Luis says Powell became obsessed with tracking them down. The mother cow was shot about 2 weeks ago. Powell claimed she charged him, but Luis thinks it was deliberate. The bull escaped with the newborn calves." "So he's been hunting them," Emily said, anger rising in her voice. "Not to recover them, but for revenge." The sheriff nodded solemnly. "Luis says Powell has scheduled a private auction for tomorrow afternoon, buyers flying in from all over the country interested in these rare bloodlines." "But he doesn't have the calves," Rebecca pointed out, having overheard the conversation. "No," Whitaker agreed, "but he's telling buyers he does. Luis thinks Powell plans to seize the calves from us before the auction, one way or another." A beeping sound from the monitoring equipment interrupted them. El Corazon's vital signs were fluctuating, his massive body twitching despite the sedation. "He's going into shock," Emily said, rushing to the bull's side. "Nathan, increase the IV rate. Rebecca, get the emergency medications ready." As they worked to stabilize the bull, the smaller calf began making distressed sounds, sensing something was wrong. Its sibling pressed against it protectively, both calves now fully alert and focused on El Corazon. For the next hour, Emily fought to save the bull, administering medications, cleaning infected wounds, and removing the bullet that had been slowly poisoning his system. Throughout it all, the calves watched silently, as if holding their breath. "He's stabilizing," Emily finally announced, checking the monitors. "But he's not out of danger. The next 12 hours will be critical." As if understanding her words, the larger calf let out a soft moo Emily approached the calves' enclosure, checking them again. The smaller one had declined slightly during the crisis, lying down while its siblings stood guard. "They understand what's happening," Margaret observed from where she sat in the corner. "Animals know more than we give them credit for." "The bond between them is extraordinary," Emily agreed. "This bull has literally sacrificed himself for calves that aren't even his own species. I've never seen anything like it." "Love doesn't always make sense," Margaret said simply. "My Henry used to say that God sometimes places the greatest hearts in the most unexpected creatures." Sheriff Whitaker cleared his throat. "We need to discuss what happens next. Powell won't give up easily, especially with buyers arriving tomorrow." "We need more time," Emily insisted. "The bull isn't stable enough to be moved, and that smaller calf needs specialized care. I've called for a deputy to stand guard tonight," Whitaker assured her. "And I've reached out to the state agricultural inspector. If what Louise says is true about Powell's breeding operation, there could be serious charges." "Will that be enough to stop him?" Nathan asked skeptically. "Mason Powell has spent a lifetime believing rules don't apply to him," Margaret said, rising from her chair with a soft grunt. "Men like that don't change overnight." As the others discussed security arrangements, Emily remained beside El Corazon, monitoring his vital signs and adjusting his medications. The massive bull had survived against impossible odds, protecting these calves through bullet wounds, infection, and starvation. "You're quite something, aren't you?" she murmured, gently stroking his broad forehead. "Fighting so hard for them." To her surprise, the bull's eyes opened slightly, unfocused but conscious despite the heavy sedation. His gaze drifted toward the calves' enclosure, and a soft rumble emerged from his chest. The calves immediately responded, the larger one mooing back, while the smaller one struggled to its feet. "They hear you," Emily told him softly. "They know you're still fighting." El Corazon's eyes closed again, but his breathing seemed easier, more regular. The connection between these unlikely companions transcended ordinary animal behavior. It spoke of something deeper, something that made Emily question everything she thought she knew about the creatures in her care. Dawn broke over the clinic with stripes of amber and gold painting the eastern sky. Emily had dozed in fits and starts throughout the night, never fully sleeping as she monitored the bull's condition. El Corazon had stabilized, his breathing deeper and more regular, but infection remained a serious concern. The antibiotics were working, but slowly, too slowly for Emily's comfort. "How's he doing?" Nathan asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee. He'd spent the night on a cot in the clinic office, while Rebecca had gone home briefly to shower and change. "Holding his own," Emily replied, accepting the coffee gratefully, "which is something of a miracle considering what he's been through." They moved to check on the calves. The larger one had improved dramatically overnight, now standing steadily and drinking formula from a bottle. The smaller calf remained a concern, however. Though slightly stronger, it still struggled to maintain its body temperature and showed little interest in food. "The blood work came back," Emily said, reviewing the results on her tablet. "I was right about the heart defect. It's congenital. This little one was born with it." Nathan frowned. "Is there anything we can do?" "There are surgical options, but not here. Not with our equipment." Emily sighed, stroking the small calf's head. "For now, we keep it stable and comfortable." Outside, a deputy's patrol car remained parked at the entrance to the clinic, a visible deterrent against any attempt by Powell to reclaim the animals. Sheriff Whitaker had promised to return by mid-morning with news from the agricultural inspector. "I've been thinking about what happened," Nathan said, leaning against the stall divider. "About how El Corazon ended up with these calves." Emily looked up, interested. "What's your theory?" "Louise said the mother cow helped El Corazon escape, right? What if they formed some kind of bond during that first meeting at the rodeo? Something that transcended normal animal behavior?" It's possible, Emily acknowledged. Animals form unusual attachments sometimes, especially in stressful situations. So they escape together, live in the wild for 3 years. She gets pregnant, probably from one of Powell's other heritage bulls before they escaped. Then Powell finally tracks them down, shoots her, but El Corazon manages to save the newborn calves. Emily nodded slowly. It fits the timeline, and it would explain his protective behavior. He's keeping a promise to their mother. A promise, Nathan repeated softly. That's exactly what it looks like. The clinic door opened, and Rebecca returned, bringing with her the smell of fresh morning air and pastries from the local bakery. "Any change?" she asked, setting down a box of donuts. "Stable but critical," Emily replied. "Both the bull and the smaller calf need specialized care we can't provide here." Rebecca's expression turned serious. "I heard something in town. Powell's been telling people those animals are his property, stolen by outsider conservationists. He's turning this into an us versus them situation." Emily felt a chill. In small rural communities like theirs, such divisions could become dangerous quickly. What are people saying? Mixed reactions. Some folks are buying his story. Others... Rebecca hesitated. Others are sharing stories about Powell's business practices over the years. Not all flattering. "The truth has a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient times," came Margaret Thompson's voice as she entered the clinic, bringing with her a cardboard box. Despite the early hour, she was impeccably dressed in practical ranch wear, her silver hair neatly pinned. "Especially when powerful men get desperate." Emily smiled at the older woman. "Margaret, you should be resting." "At my age, rest is overrated," Margaret replied briskly. "Besides, I brought something that might help." She set the box down and removed an old leather-bound ledger. This was Henry's. He kept records of every business dealing he ever had, including those with the Cortez breeding program. She opened the ledger to a marked page revealing detailed notes and photographs. "These are records of the bloodlines they were preserving, including these." She pointed to a photograph of cattle that strongly resembled the calves in Emily's care. "Piney Woods cattle," Emily confirmed, examining the image. "Yes, but not just any Piney Woods. These were part of the Hickory lineage, the oldest and purest bloodline dating back to the first Spanish cattle brought to America in the 1500s. Margaret's finger traced a notation in the margin. Henry was helping Cortez document the lineage for historical preservation. These calves may be among the last of their kind. The implications sank in. No wonder Powell wants them so badly. "It's not just about money," Margaret said grimly. "It's about control. Whoever owns these bloodlines controls a piece of living history and can charge whatever they want to those seeking to preserve it." Before Emily could respond, her phone rang. Sheriff Whitaker calling with an update. "I've got the agricultural inspector with me," he said without preamble. "We're heading to Powell Ranch with a search warrant. Luis provided enough evidence to convince a judge." "That's good news," Emily replied, relief evident in her voice. "Maybe," the sheriff said cautiously, "but Powell's not at the ranch. His foreman says he left at dawn with 3 men and several transport crates. Emily, I think he might be heading your way." Emily's gaze darted to the window where the lone deputy's car still sat in the driveway. "We've got Deputy Rodriguez here. I've called for backup, but it'll take time. The nearest available units are in Alpine." Whitaker's voice was tight with concern. "Just stay alert. I'll get there as soon as I can." As Emily hung up, she quickly briefed the others on the situation. Nathan immediately moved to check the clinic's security, while Rebecca called the local vet tech school where she taught, canceling her morning class. "We should move the animals," Nathan suggested, returning from his security check. "The back treatment room has no windows and only one entrance. Easier to secure." Emily shook her head. "Moving El Corazon in his condition could kill him, and the small calf is too fragile for additional stress." "Then we hunker down and protect them here," Rebecca said firmly. Margaret, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Mason Powell might surprise you with his methods, but not with his timing. He'll wait until he thinks he has the advantage." "The auction," Emily realized. "Louise said it's today. Powell needs these calves before buyers arrive. Which means we just need to hold out until Sheriff Whitaker returns with the agricultural inspector," Nathan concluded. Emily wasn't so sure. In her experience, desperate people rarely acted rationally, and Mason Powell had decades of getting his way to reinforce his sense of entitlement. As the morning progressed with no sign of Powell, Emily continued treating her patients. El Corazon showed small but encouraging signs of improvement, becoming more alert and responsive. The larger calf was thriving, while the smaller one maintained its fragile stability. Around 11, Emily noticed something remarkable. Despite his weakened state, El Corazon had positioned himself in his stall to maintain visual contact with the calves at all times. When the smaller calf struggled to stand, the bull would make a soft, rumbling sound that seemed to encourage it. The calf would respond, making renewed efforts. "It's like he's talking to them," Rebecca observed, watching the interaction. "He is," Emily confirmed, "in his own way." She thought about the journey these three animals had made together. The miles of harsh terrain, the predators they must have avoided, the challenges of finding food and water in drought conditions. Through it all, this massive bull had protected these vulnerable calves, putting their survival above his own. "My daddy had an old saying," Margaret said, joining them by the stall. "You never know what someone's made of until they've got nothing left to lose." This bull had everything to lose, and he chose to protect these little ones anyway. A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Emily saw two pickup trucks pulling into the clinic driveway, blocking the deputy's patrol car. Mason Powell emerged from the first vehicle along with two men she didn't recognize. From the second truck, three more men appeared, including Luis Vasquez, who kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with the clinic windows. Deputy Rodriguez stepped out of his patrol car, hand resting cautiously on his holster as Powell approached. "This doesn't look good," Nathan muttered, moving closer to the window. Emily's mind raced. Powell wouldn't attempt something illegal with a deputy present, would he? But as she watched the interaction outside, she realized Powell was showing Rodriguez papers of some kind. The deputy examined them, made a phone call, and then, incredibly, nodded to Powell. "He's letting them come in," Rebecca said in disbelief. "Court order," Emily guessed grimly. Powell must have gotten a sympathetic judge to issue an emergency property retrieval order. Margaret's expression hardened. "Judge Monroe, he and Mason go way back." The front door opened, and Deputy Rodriguez entered first, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes apologetic. "Dr. Thornton," he began formally, "I have a court order authorizing Mr. Powell to recover livestock identified as his property." Mason Powell followed, triumph barely concealed beneath a veneer of politeness. "Nothing personal, Emily. Just business." Emily stepped forward, positioning herself between Powell and the treatment area. "These animals are under veterinary care. Moving them could be fatal, especially the bull and smaller calf." "My veterinarian will take over their care," Powell replied smoothly, gesturing to a man who entered behind him. Dr. James Whitley, a livestock specialist known for prioritizing economic value over animal welfare. "Jim," Emily acknowledged coldly. They had clashed at veterinary conferences over proper treatment protocols. "Emily," he replied with a thin smile, "I'll take it from here." Emily stood her ground. "I need to see that court order." Deputy Rodriguez handed her the document. Emily scanned it quickly, looking for any loophole or limitation. The order specifically identified one male Brahman bull and two calves currently held at Thornton Veterinary Clinic as Powell's property, authorizing immediate recovery. "This bull isn't branded with Powell Ranch marks," Emily pointed out. "He carries the Cortez Breeding Program brand." "A clerical error in the registration," Powell dismissed casually. "I purchased him legitimately 3 years ago." "And the calves?" Emily pressed. "Their bloodline is Piney Woods, part of a protected heritage program." "Crossbred on my property," Powell countered, "making them mine." Emily looked to Deputy Rodriguez. "Officer, I have reason to believe these animals are evidence in an ongoing investigation by the state agricultural inspector. Sheriff Whitaker can confirm this." Rodriguez hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "The sheriff did mention an investigation, but this court order supersedes—" "My animals, my property," Powell interrupted firmly. "Now step aside, Dr. Thornton, unless you want to be charged with interfering with a lawful recovery." The tension in the room was palpable. Nathan and Rebecca had moved closer to Emily, forming a united front. Margaret Thompson remained seated, watching Powell with the calculated assessment of someone who had known him for decades. "You always were in such a hurry, Mason," she remarked casually. "Just like when you tried to buy out Henry's water rights back in '97, rushing in before anyone could look too closely at the details." Powell's expression tightened at the mention of the old business dispute, one he'd ultimately lost. "This isn't the same situation, Margaret." "Isn't it?" she replied, opening Henry's ledger again. "Because Henry kept very detailed records about the Cortez breeding program, including which bloodlines were legally registered in the United States and which weren't." She smiled thinly. "Be a shame if those records found their way to the agricultural inspector." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Powell's face. Import regulations for livestock were strictly enforced, with significant penalties for violations, including seizure of assets. The standoff was interrupted by a low, rumbling bellow from the treatment area. El Corazon, despite his weakened state, had risen to his feet. His massive frame swayed unsteadily, but his eyes were clear and focused on the newcomers. "He's protecting the calves," Nathan said quietly. Dr. Whitley stepped forward, medical bag in hand. "That bull needs to be sedated immediately. He's a danger in that condition." "The only danger here," Emily said firmly, "is moving these animals before they're stable." The bull bellowed again, louder this time. The calves responded with anxious bleats, the larger one positioning itself protectively in front of its smaller sibling. "This has gone on long enough," Powell snapped, gesturing to his men. "Get the transport crates ready." "We're taking these animals now." Emily made a split-second decision. "Deputy Rodriguez, I'm officially declaring these animals too medically fragile for transport. Moving them would constitute animal cruelty under Texas state law." Rodriguez looked torn, glancing between the court order in his hand and the clearly distressed animals. "She's stalling," Powell accused. "These are valuable breeding animals, not pets." "They're living creatures," Emily countered, "who have suffered enough." Before Powell could respond, the clinic door opened again. Sheriff Whitaker entered, accompanied by a stern-looking woman in a state agricultural department uniform. "Mason," the sheriff acknowledged coolly. "Seems we had the same destination in mind today." The agricultural inspector, Dr. Diane Feldman, stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to contentious situations. Her crisp uniform and clipboard projected official authority as she surveyed the tense standoff. "Mr. Powell," she said, her tone professionally neutral, "I'm here to investigate allegations of illegal breeding and importation of protected heritage livestock. I'll need to examine these animals immediately." Powell's face remained impassive, but Emily noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw, a tell she remembered from her teenage years working at his ranch. He was furious but calculating. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "But, as you can see, I'm in the middle of recovering my property with a valid court order." He gestured toward Deputy Rodriguez, who reluctantly held up the document. Dr. Feldman examined the court order carefully, then removed her own paperwork from a leather portfolio. "This is a state-issued hold order that supersedes local court directives. These animals cannot be moved until my investigation is complete." Powell's veneer of cooperation cracked slightly. "This is outrageous. I have buyers arriving within hours." "Buyers?" Dr. Feldman interrupted, eyebrow raised. "For unregistered heritage breed cattle? That would be a violation of federal agricultural regulations, Mr. Powell." The room fell silent as the implications settled. Even Powell's men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sheriff Whitaker moved subtly, positioning himself near the entrance to block any hasty exits. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion at your ranch," Dr. Feldman suggested to Powell, though her tone made it clear this wasn't optional. "I'll need to see your breeding records and import documentation." Powell's eyes narrowed as he calculated his options. Emily could almost see the wheels turning behind his weathered face, weighing risk against reward as he'd done his entire business life. "Fine," he conceded finally, though his tone suggested this was far from over. "But I'm leaving my veterinarian here to monitor my animals." "That won't be necessary," Dr. Feldman replied firmly. "Dr. Thornton is more than qualified, and these animals will remain under state supervision until this matter is resolved." For a moment, Emily thought Powell might argue further, but a subtle head shake from his lawyer, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, seemed to dissuade him. With a curt nod to his men, Powell turned to leave, pausing only to lock eyes with Emily. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Not by a long shot." As Powell and his entourage departed, followed closely by Dr. Feldman and Sheriff Whitaker, a collective breath of relief filled the clinic. The immediate danger had passed, but Emily knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Mason Powell had spent decades accumulating power in Terrell County. He wouldn't surrender it easily. "That was too close," Nathan said, peering through the window as the vehicles pulled away. "It's not over," Emily replied, echoing Powell's words but with a different meaning. She turned back toward the treatment area where El Corazon stood trembling from exertion, still on his feet despite his weakened condition. "Our priority hasn't changed. We need to save these animals." The bull's eyes followed her as she approached his stall. Despite the sedatives still in his system, he had risen to defend the calves when he sensed danger, an extraordinary feat of will that had likely cost him dearly in his already compromised state. "Easy, big guy," Emily murmured, reaching out slowly to stroke his massive neck. "You can rest now." "They're safe." As if understanding her words, El Corazon exhaled heavily, his legs buckling as the last of his strength gave way. Emily and Nathan rushed forward, helping guide his massive body safely to the ground rather than letting him collapse. "He's burning up," Emily noted with alarm, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from the bull's hide. "The infection's getting worse despite the antibiotics." Rebecca quickly gathered fresh cold compresses while Emily drew blood samples for updated testing. The bull's breathing had become labored again, each exhale producing a concerning rattle. "Pneumonia as a secondary infection," Emily diagnosed grimly, listening through her stethoscope. "His immune system is overwhelmed." In the adjacent stall, the calves had become agitated, sensing something was wrong. The larger calf paced restlessly while the smaller one pressed against the divider, making soft distress sounds. "They know," Margaret observed quietly from where she sat. "They can feel him slipping away." Emily refused to accept that outcome. "We need stronger antibiotics and more fluids. Nathan, There's a special reserve of medications in the back safe. The combination is my birth date." As Nathan hurried to retrieve the supplies, Emily continued her examination, looking for any intervention that might turn the tide. The bull had survived so much: gunshot wounds, starvation, dehydration, days in the harsh elements while protecting the calves. To lose him now, when they were so close to safety, seemed cruelly unjust. "Don't you dare give up," she whispered fiercely, leaning close to the bull's ear. "Those calves still need you." El Corazon's eye rolled toward her, surprisingly lucid despite his condition. A soft rumble emanated from his chest, not quite a moo, but a definite acknowledgement. For the next hour, Emily worked feverishly, administering stronger antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, and supportive medications. She irrigated the infected wounds again, applied fresh antimicrobial treatments, and established a second IV line for additional fluids and medications. Throughout it all, she maintained a steady stream of encouraging words, believing somehow that the great bull understood her. Perhaps it was professional desperation or emotional attachment clouding her judgment, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that El Corazon was fighting to understand, to communicate back. "His vitals are stabilizing," Rebecca reported cautiously, monitoring the equipment they'd connected to the bull. "Temperature's still high, but not climbing anymore." Emily nodded, allowing herself a moment of cautious optimism. "Let's keep the cold compresses rotating, and I want to try something." She turned to the calves' enclosure and carefully opened the gate, letting the larger calf out. Under her supervision, it immediately approached the divider, separating it from El Corazon, stretching its neck to make contact with the bull. "Is that safe?" Nathan asked uncertainly. "I think it might be necessary," Emily replied. "The connection between them is stronger than any medicine I can provide." The calf made a soft, lowing sound, and to everyone's surprise, El Corazon responded with a weak but distinct rumble. The bull's respiratory rate, which had been erratic, seemed to steady slightly in the calf's presence. "Margaret," Emily asked, "could you watch them for a moment? I need to check on the smaller calf." The elderly woman nodded, taking a seat near the stall where she could observe both animals. "My Henry always said animals heal better when they're with their family. Doesn't matter if they're the same kind or not. The heart knows its own." Emily smiled gratefully before turning her attention to the smaller calf. Its condition remained precarious, the congenital heart defect limiting its ability to thrive despite receiving the same care as its sibling. As she conducted her examination, Emily's mind worked through possibilities. "There's a cardiac specialist at Texas A&M who might be able to help," she told Rebecca as they gently repositioned the small calf for comfort. "Dr. Abernathy has done experimental procedures on calves with similar defects." "That's a long transport," Rebecca noted worriedly. "Is it strong enough?" "Not yet," Emily admitted. "But if we can stabilize it here first." She trailed off, calculating medication adjustments that might help strengthen the calf for eventual transport. A commotion at the front of the clinic interrupted her thoughts. Emily hurried to investigate, finding Sheriff Whitaker returning alone, his expression grave. "We've got a problem," he announced without preamble. "Powell gave Dr. Feldman the slip at the ranch, sent her off with his foreman to review records in an outbuilding while he and two men took off in a different vehicle. He's coming back here," Emily realized, alarm rising. "Most likely," the sheriff confirmed. "I've called for backup again, but with the county fair starting today in Alpine, most units are tied up with traffic control." Emily glanced at the wall clock. Nearly 3 in the afternoon. They'd been so focused on the animal's care that time had slipped away unnoticed. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Whitaker replied grimly. "His ranch is only 20 minutes out, and he had at least a 15-minute head start on me." Emily made a quick decision. "We need to move the calves to the secure treatment room at the back. It has a reinforced door and no windows." "What about El Corazon?" Nathan asked, glancing toward the bull's stall. He's too large and too unstable to move, Emily said, the painful reality settling in her chest. We focus on protecting the calves. Margaret, who had been listening silently, spoke up. Mason won't give up those calves without a fight, not with buyers waiting and his reputation on the line. Then we'll give him one, Sheriff Whitaker stated firmly, checking his service weapon. Nobody's taking those animals illegally on my watch. As Nathan and Rebecca carefully moved the calves to the secure room, Emily returned to El Corazon's side. The bull's condition had stabilized somewhat, but he remained critically ill. His massive chest rose and fell with labored breathing, each exhale accompanied by a concerning rattle. "I need to move the calves somewhere safer," she told him softly, stroking his broad forehead. "But I'll be right back. You just keep fighting." To her surprise, the bull's eye opened, focusing on her with unexpected clarity. He made a soft sound, different from his previous vocalizations, almost questioning. "They'll be safe," Emily promised, feeling strangely certain he understood. "I won't let anything happen to them." El Corazon exhaled deeply, his massive body relaxing slightly. Emily continued stroking his head, torn between staying with him and helping secure the calves. The bond she developed with this extraordinary animal in just 24 hours surprised her with its intensity. A sudden banging at the clinic's front door made the decision for her. Sheriff Whitaker moved quickly to the entrance, hand on his holster. "Stay with him," Rebecca urged Emily, seeing her hesitation. "Nathan and I can finish securing the calves." Emily nodded gratefully, remaining at the bull's side as the sheriff dealt with the disturbance. Through the treatment room window, she could see Mason Powell's truck parked haphazardly in the driveway, 2 additional vehicles behind it. Powell's voice carried clearly, his tone aggressive as he confronted Sheriff Whitaker. "I have a signed statement from Judge Monroe overriding the state hold order. Those animals are coming with me now." "That's not how this works, Mason," the sheriff replied evenly. "State jurisdiction supersedes—" "Check with the county attorney if you don't believe me," Powell interrupted, holding up a document. "Called in a favor. Those are my animals, and I'm taking them today." Emily felt her heart sink. Powell's connections ran deep in county government. If he'd managed to find a legal loophole, they might be forced to surrender the animals. El Corazon shifted restlessly, sensing the tension. Despite his weakened state, he made an attempt to rise, falling back with a distressed sound. "Easy," Emily soothed, placing a gentle hand on his neck. "Save your strength." The bull's eyes fixed on hers, communicating something so profound that Emily felt tears spring unexpectedly to her eyes. There was intelligence there, and something more, a desperate plea that transcended species barriers. "I understand," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was acknowledging. "I'll protect them. I promise." Behind her, the confrontation at the entrance grew more heated. Powell's voice rose in volume, demanding immediate access. Sheriff Whitaker's responses remained measured but firm, a stalling tactic that wouldn't work indefinitely. A new sound caught Emily's attention. A soft, distressed bleat from the secure room where the calves had been moved. The smaller calf was calling out, its voice weak but persistent. Within moments, the larger calf joined in, their combined vocalizations creating a plaintive chorus. El Corazon responded immediately, a deep bellow erupting from his chest with surprising strength. The effort clearly cost him, but he repeated it, his body trembling with exertion. Emily watched in astonishment as the bull gathered his remaining strength, his powerful legs struggling to coordinate. Against all medical probability, against her urgent, gentle restraint, El Corazon rose to his feet. "Nathan," Emily called out, alarmed by the bull's sudden mobilization, "I need help in here." But El Corazon wasn't aggressive or panicked. He stood shakily, swaying with weakness, his focus entirely on the direction of the calves' calls. With deliberate determination, he began moving toward the secure room, each step an extraordinary feat of will. He's going to them, Margaret observed, having returned to the treatment area. Nothing on God's green earth could stop him now. Emily made a split-second decision, opening the gate to the bull's stall rather than fighting his determination. Let's guide him, at least. Make sure he doesn't fall. With Emily on one side and Nathan hurrying to support the other, they escorted the massive bull as he laboriously made his way toward the secure room. By the time they reached it, El Corazon was breathing in harsh gasps, his hide slick with sweat, yet his purpose never wavered. Rebecca opened the secure room door, revealing the distressed calves inside. Upon seeing El Corazon, both calves immediately quieted, moving toward him with soft bleats of recognition. The bull lowered his massive head, touching noses with each calf in turn. The smaller one pressed against his chest while the larger one positioned itself protectively at his side. Together they formed a tableau of impossible devotion that transcended nature's usual boundaries. "What's he doing?" Nathan whispered, watching in awe. "Saying goodbye," Margaret answered softly, her weathered face solemn. "Or making a last stand." "Maybe both." Emily felt the truth of Margaret's words with painful clarity. El Corazon had used his final reserves of strength to reach the calves, to protect them one last time against the threat approaching from outside. As if confirming this assessment, the bull positioned himself squarely in the doorway of the secure room, creating a living barrier between the calves and any who might enter. Despite his weakness, his stance was unmistakably defensive. Head lowered, body braced. From the front of the clinic came the sound of the door opening, followed by multiple footsteps. Mason Powell had gained entry, and the confrontation Emily had been dreading was now imminent. She took a deep breath and moved to stand beside El Corazon, placing her hand on his massive shoulder in solidarity. "Together, then," she told the bull quietly. "They'll have to go through both of us." Mason Powell strode into the treatment area with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way, flanked by two ranch hands whose discomfort was evident in their shifting gazes. Behind them, Sheriff Whitaker followed with his hand resting meaningfully on his holster, his expression a careful mask of professional neutrality. "This ends now, Emily," Powell announced, waving a document. "I've got a county emergency order that supersedes—" His words died as he took in the scene before him. El Corazon standing guard in the doorway of the secure room, the calves visible behind him, and Emily positioned protectively at the bull's side. For a moment, genuine surprise registered on Powell's weathered face. That bull shouldn't even be alive, let alone standing. "Some things are stronger than they appear," Emily replied evenly, maintaining her position. "Including the law." "Sheriff, what's your take on this new order?" Whitaker stepped forward, carefully positioning himself between Powell and the animals. "County can't override state jurisdiction on agricultural matters, Mason. You know that Judge Monroe overstepped his authority." Powell's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "We can debate legal technicalities all day, but facts are facts. Those animals belong to Powell Ranch. They were bred on my property, from my stock." "That's not entirely accurate, is it?" The new voice came from the clinic entrance where Luis Vasquez stood hesitantly, hat in hand. He stepped inside, keeping a respectful distance from his employer. "Mr. Powell, I can't do this anymore." Powell turned slowly, his expression darkening. "Luis, this isn't the place for—" "It's exactly the place," Luis interrupted, straightening his shoulders despite the tremble in his voice. "These people need to know the truth about those calves. About what really happened to their mother." A dangerous stillness came over Powell. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Luis. 20 years of employment, a generous salary, your daughter's college fund, all of that can disappear very quickly." The threat hung in the air, naked and unashamed. Luis hesitated, glancing at his boots, then at El Corazon, who watched the exchange with surprising alertness, despite his weakened state. My father used to say, "A man who trades his conscience for comfort will find neither in the end," Louise said finally, meeting Powell's gaze. "I need to be able to face my children." He turned to Sheriff Whitaker. The Piney Woods cow, the calf's mother, was imported illegally from Mexico after the Cortez program was shut down. Mr. Powell kept her separate from the main herd in the old North Pasture facility. When she escaped with El Corazon 3 years ago, he became obsessed with finding them. "This is slander," Powell snapped, but Luis continued. "2 weeks ago we finally tracked them to the eastern canyon. The cow was protecting newborn calves. These calves, Mr. Powell shot her deliberately, not in self-defense like he claimed, said he didn't need her anymore, just the calves for their bloodline." Luis swallowed hard. "El Corazon charged us after the shooting. Mr. Powell shot him too, but the bull still managed to escape with the calves." The treatment room fell silent as the implications settled. Emily felt a wave of grief for the mother cow, followed by renewed admiration for El Corazon's extraordinary devotion. "That's quite a story," Powell said dismissively. "Shame there's no evidence to support it." "Actually, there is." Luis reached into his jacket, producing a small device. "My nephew showed me how to use the video function on my phone. I recorded the whole thing. I couldn't sleep after what we did." Powell's composure finally cracked, rage flashing across his features. He lunged toward Luis, but Sheriff Whitaker moved swiftly between them. "That's enough, Mason," Whitaker warned, hand now firmly on his weapon. "Luis, I'll need that recording as evidence." Behind them, El Corazon swayed dangerously, the exertion of standing guard clearly taking its toll. Emily moved quickly to support him, pressing her shoulder against his massive flank. "He needs to lie down," she urged Nathan and Rebecca. "Help me!" Together they guided the bull gently to the floor of the secure room, where he could still see the confrontation but rest his exhausted body. The calves immediately pressed close to him, the smaller one tucking itself against his chest, while the larger one stood protectively nearby. Powell watched this interaction with cold calculation in his eyes. "This changes nothing legally. Those calves are still valuable breeding stock from my ranch." "Illegally imported breeding stock," corrected a new voice as Dr. Feldman returned, entering with a stern expression, "which makes them subject to immediate seizure under federal agricultural regulations." She held up her tablet. "I've just received confirmation from the USDA. The Piney Woods Heritage Protection Program has priority claim on these calves." Powell's face flushed with anger. "This is government overreach. These animals represent years of investment in an illegal breeding operation," Dr. Feldman finished for him. "Mr. Powell, you're facing serious charges: illegal importation of livestock, falsification of breeding records, animal cruelty, and now attempted intimidation of a witness," Sheriff Whitaker added, glancing at Luis. Powell's expression shifted, the calculation returning as he reassessed his position. "My lawyer will have something to say about these accusations." He turned to his ranch hands. "Let's go. This isn't over." As Powell and his men departed, Luis lingered behind, approaching the secure room cautiously. El Corazon watched him warily, a low rumble emanating from his chest. "I'm sorry," Luis said simply, addressing the bull directly. "I should have spoken up sooner." To everyone's surprise, the bull's rumble subsided. He exhaled heavily, his great head resting on the floor, eyes still fixed on Luis, but without hostility. "He understands," Margaret observed quietly from her corner. "Animals know when someone's trying to make amends." Dr. Feldman approached Emily, her official demeanor softening slightly. "What's his condition?" "Critical," Emily replied honestly. "Infection, pneumonia, extreme exhaustion. He's fighting, but—" She left the sentence unfinished, the prognosis too painful to voice. The agricultural inspector nodded solemnly. And the calves? The larger one is recovering well. The smaller one has a congenital heart defect that will require specialized treatment. Dr. Feldman made notes on her tablet. I'll arrange emergency transport to the Regional Agricultural Center. They have the facilities to treat the calves properly. What about El Corazon? Emily asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Feldman hesitated. Given his condition and age, standard protocol would be to evaluate quality of life prospects. Emily understood the euphemism all too well. He deserves a chance. After everything he's done to protect these calves. I understand the emotional attachment, Dr. Feldman interrupted gently. But we have to be realistic about his chances of recovery and future quality of life. He's more than just a bull, Rebecca interjected passionately. What he's done goes beyond normal animal behavior. It's extraordinary. Dr. Feldman's expression remained sympathetic but professional. I'll note your concerns in my report. For now, continue treatment as you see fit. The transport team will arrive tomorrow morning for the calves. As the inspector stepped away to make arrangements, Emily knelt beside El Corazon, checking his vital signs again. His condition had deteriorated after the exertion of standing guard. His breathing was more labored, his temperature dangerously high despite the medications. "You magnificent, stubborn creature," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Why couldn't you have just stayed down and rested?" The bull's eye rolled toward her, a surprising clarity in its dark depths. The answer seemed obvious, even without words. Because the calves needed him. Because some things were worth the sacrifice. Sheriff Whitaker approached, having finished taking Luis's statement. "How's he doing?" "Not good," Emily admitted. Using the last of his strength to protect the calves took a heavy toll. The sheriff nodded gravely. "Some might call that foolish. I call it heroic." "Will the charges against Powell stick?" Emily asked, desperate for some justice to come from this situation. "Luis's video evidence is pretty damning," Whitaker confirmed, "and once Dr. Feldman completes her investigation of the ranch, there will likely be additional violations discovered. Mason's made a lot of friends in high places over the years, but this time, I think he's gone too far." A small comfort, Emily thought, but not enough to save El Corazon. The great bull was slipping away despite their best efforts, his extraordinary journey nearing its end. Throughout the afternoon and into evening, Emily remained by El Corazon's side, administering medications, monitoring vital signs, and doing everything within her power to ease his suffering. The calves stayed close, especially the smaller one, which seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. It pressed against the bull's chest, its tiny form rising and falling with each of his labored breaths. Nathan and Rebecca took turns assisting, bringing supplies and offering support. Margaret remained as well, her quiet presence a comfort as the hours passed. She shared stories of the old ranching days, of animals that had shown remarkable intelligence and compassion, of the bonds that sometimes transcended human understanding. "My Henry always said that animals have a wisdom we've forgotten," she told Emily, as they watched El Corazon struggle for each breath. "They don't overthink things like we do. They just know what matters." As night fell, the bull's condition continued to decline. His breathing became more shallow, his responses to stimuli less frequent. Emily adjusted his pain medication, ensuring he wouldn't suffer, while monitoring the infection that continued to rage despite the strongest antibiotics. "I don't understand why the medications aren't working better," she said frustratedly, checking the latest blood work results. "It's like his system is just giving up." "Or letting go," Margaret suggested gently. "There comes a point, Emily, when the fight itself becomes too costly, when peace is the greater mercy." Emily knew Margaret was right. but acceptance came reluctantly. This magnificent animal had survived against impossible odds, protecting two vulnerable calves through the harshest conditions. To lose him now, when they were finally safe, seemed a cruel twist of fate. Around midnight, El Corazon's breathing pattern changed, becoming more erratic. Emily immediately administered additional medication, but she recognized the signs. The end was approaching. "Should we move the calves?" Nathan asked quietly, having returned from a brief rest. Emily considered the question, watching how the calves remained pressed against the bull, offering their own form of comfort. "No," she decided. "They should be with him. They're his family." The smaller calf, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, nuzzled El Corazon's massive head, making soft bleating sounds. The bull responded with a weak rumble, his eye finding the calf with obvious recognition. "He's saying goodbye," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. For the next hour, they maintained a quiet vigil as El Corazon's breaths became increasingly labored and further apart. The monitors showed his heart rate slowing, his body temperature dropping as his mighty system began to shut down. Emily sat beside him, one hand resting on his broad forehead, the other checking vital signs. "It's okay," she told him softly. "The calves are safe now. You've done everything you could." More than anyone could have expected, El Corazon's eye fixed on hers one last time, conveying something so profound that Emily felt it physically, a connection that transcended the barriers between human and animal. In that gaze was acknowledgement, acceptance, and something like gratitude. With a final, shuddering exhale, El Corazon grew still. The monitors flatlined, their quiet beeping the only sound in the room. The great bull was gone. The calves seemed to sense the change immediately. The larger one began pacing restlessly, while the smaller one pressed desperately against El Corazon's still warm chest, making plaintive bleating sounds that pierced Emily's heart. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "He was the most extraordinary bull I've ever known." Margaret placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "He didn't die in vain, child. Those calves will live because of him." And Mason Powell will finally face consequences for his actions. Small consolations in the face of such loss, but Emily clung to them nonetheless. El Corazon had fought to his last breath to protect the calves entrusted to his care. The least she could do was ensure his sacrifice meant something. As dawn approached, Emily finally stepped outside the clinic for a moment of fresh air. The eastern sky was lightening with the promise of a new day, stars fading as night retreated. She thought about the journey that had brought El Corazon to them, from feared rodeo bull to gentle protector, defying every natural instinct to care for calves not his own. The clinic door opened behind her, and Sheriff Whitaker stepped out, offering a cup of coffee. "Just heard from Dr. Feldman," he said as Emily accepted the steaming cup gratefully. "The Heritage Breed Conservation Program is sending their own team for the calves. Apparently, they're quite excited about these particular bloodlines." "What will happen to them?" Emily asked. "They'll be incorporated into the breeding program, protected as living historical treasures." The sheriff hesitated. "I also told her about El Corazon, about what he did for those calves." Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "She's recommending a special designation for him in the program records," Whitaker continued, "as a guardian of the bloodline. First time they've ever recognized a bull from a different breed that way." It was a small gesture, but meaningful, an acknowledgement of El Corazon's extraordinary actions. Emily sipped her coffee, watching the sunrise paint the distant hills with gold. "What about Powell?" she asked finally. "Luis's video evidence has been turned over to the district attorney. Between that and what Dr. Feldman found at the ranch," Whitaker shook his head, Mason's empire is crumbling fast. Turns out this wasn't his only illegal operation. A measure of justice, then. Though it couldn't bring back El Corazon or the calves' mother, it ensured their suffering wouldn't be forgotten or dismissed. Inside the clinic, Rebecca appeared at the doorway. "Emily, you should come see this." Concerned, Emily hurried back inside, following Rebecca to the secure room where the calves remained with El Corazon's body. The sight that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. The smaller calf, which had been weakening steadily since they'd found it, was standing more steadily than before. It had positioned itself beside its sibling, both calves maintaining a protective stance near El Corazon. "Its vitals have improved," Rebecca reported with quiet amazement. "Heart rate, respiration, even temperature, all better than yesterday." Emily checked for herself, confirming Rebecca's assessment with astonishment. The improvement defied medical explanation. The congenital heart defect remained, but somehow the little calf had found new strength. "It's like he passed something on to them," Margaret observed from her chair in the corner. "Some of that fighting spirit." Whether it was coincidence, the result of their treatments finally taking effect, or something more mysterious, Emily couldn't say. But as she watched the calves standing strong beside their fallen protector, she chose to believe that El Corazon's influence lived on in them, a final gift from the extraordinary bull who had given everything to ensure their survival. 6 months later, Emily stood at the fence of the newly established Piney Woods Heritage Sanctuary, watching as the two calves, no longer quite so small, grazed contentedly in the late afternoon sun. The sanctuary occupied 50 acres of what had once been Powell Ranch land, repurposed by court order as part of Mason Powell's settlement with state and federal authorities. "They're thriving," remarked Dr. Feldman, who had come to conduct her quarterly inspection. The agricultural inspector had softened considerably since their first meeting, developing a genuine interest in the calves' progress. "Especially the little one. I wouldn't have given her much chance 6 months ago." Emily nodded in agreement. The smaller calf, now named Hope by the sanctuary staff, had defied all medical expectations. Though her heart defect remained, specialized treatment at Texas A&M's Veterinary Center had improved her condition significantly. She would never be as robust as her brother, Spirit, but she had developed a tenacity that reminded Emily powerfully of El Corazon. "The latest DNA analysis confirmed what we suspected," Dr. Feldman continued, consulting her tablet. "They're among the purest Piney Woods bloodlines still in existence. The conservation program considers them invaluable." "He knew," Emily said softly. Somehow, El Corazon understood how special they were. Dr. Feldman, initially skeptical of attributing such understanding to a bull, had gradually come to accept the extraordinary nature of El Corazon's actions. The evidence was simply too compelling to dismiss. "The program committee has officially recognized his contribution," she replied, showing Emily the heritage registry. There, listed as guardian of the Hickory lineage, was El Corazon's name, an unprecedented acknowledgement for a bull of a different breed. As they talked, a small tour group approached the main sanctuary building. Margaret Thompson, now serving as a volunteer educator, led them with surprising energy for her 74 years. Her knowledge of traditional ranching practices and heritage breeds had made her an invaluable resource for the sanctuary's educational programs. "And here we have Hope and Spirit," Margaret announced to the visitors, gesturing toward the calves, "the last pure descendants of the Hickory lineage, saved by the most remarkable bull I've ever encountered in 70 years of ranching." The visitors listened attentively as Margaret recounted El Corazon's story, how he had escaped captivity with the calves' mother, protected her for 3 years in the wild, and then, after her death, rescued and defended her newborn calves against impossible odds. The tale had grown into something of a local legend, drawing visitors from across the state. Emily smiled, appreciating Margaret's storytelling skills. She emphasized the bull's intelligence and devotion without anthropomorphizing him, presenting his extraordinary actions as a reminder of how little humans truly understood about animal cognition and emotion. "Where is the bull buried?" one visitor asked when Margaret concluded her tale. "Follow me," the elderly woman replied, leading them toward a simple memorial beneath a mature live oak tree at the edge of the calves' pasture. Emily watched them go, choosing to remain by the fence. She visited El Corazon's resting place often enough on her own, usually at dawn or dusk when the sanctuary was quiet. Today, she preferred to focus on his living legacy, the calves who continued to thrive against all odds. Nathan joined her at the fence, having finished his duties as the sanctuary's newly appointed livestock manager. After the events surrounding El Corazon, he had left his wildlife volunteer position to work full-time with the Heritage Breeds program. "Sheriff Whitaker called," he informed her. "Mason Powell's appeal was denied. The conviction stands." Emily nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Powell's downfall had been swift and comprehensive once Luis's video evidence became public. The illegal breeding operation was just the beginning. Investigations had uncovered tax fraud, wildlife trafficking, and environmental violations spanning decades. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now serving a 5-year sentence, his empire dismantled. "Luis and his family are doing well at their new place," Nathan continued, knowing Emily would want an update. After testifying against his former employer, Luis had used his whistleblower reward to purchase a small ranch of his own, where he now raised registered Texas longhorns using traditional, humane methods. "I'm glad," Emily replied sincerely. "It couldn't have been easy for him to come forward. He brings his kids to visit the calves every month," Nathan said with a smile. "Says he wants them to understand what courage looks like." The sanctuary had become a place of healing for many in the community. The revelation of Powell's abuses had forced a reckoning with practices that had been tacitly accepted for too long. Several neighboring ranches had subsequently improved their animal welfare standards, some even participating in heritage breed conservation programs. Rebecca appeared from the sanctuary office, waving a folder excitedly. "The grant came through? Full funding for the educational center." This was welcome news indeed. The planned El Corazon Educational Center would focus on heritage breed conservation, ethical ranching practices, and the remarkable cognitive and emotional capacities of livestock animals. Construction would begin in the spring. "He'd have hated that," Emily laughed, imagining the proud bull's reaction to having a building named after him. "All that attention." "I don't know," Rebecca mused. "I think he might have appreciated being remembered." The three friends stood in comfortable silence, watching as the tour group returned from the memorial. The visitors wore thoughtful expressions, clearly moved by El Corazon's story. Several lingered to watch Hope and Spirit, who had moved closer to the fence, curious about the gathering. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the sanctuary grounds, Emily noticed something that made her heart catch. The calves had wandered to the far corner of their pasture where El Corazon's memorial stood beneath the live oak. This had become their evening ritual, a quiet vigil at the spot where the bull who had saved them was laid to rest. "Still doing that, huh?" Nathan observed softly. "Every evening at sunset," Emily confirmed. "No matter the weather." Some of the more scientifically minded staff attributed this behavior to coincidence or the appealing shade of the oak tree. Emily knew better. She had witnessed the profound connection between the bull and calves firsthand, a bond that transcended ordinary animal behavior and challenged human understanding. Margaret rejoined them after finishing with the tour group, her eyes crinkling with satisfaction as she noticed where the calves had gone. "My daddy used to say that love leaves tracks deeper than any hoof print," she remarked, watching the calves standing sentinel by the memorial. "Those two will never forget him." "None of us will," Emily replied. As twilight deepened into dusk, a ranch hand arrived to escort the calves to their night pasture. Hope and Spirit followed willingly, but not before each one approached the simple stone marker beneath the oak, touching it briefly with their noses in what seemed remarkably like a gesture of farewell. "Dr. Thornton?" One of the sanctuary interns approached, clipboard in hand. "We've got those blood test results for the new Piney Woods heifer that arrived yesterday." Emily nodded, reluctantly turning away from the peaceful scene. Her role as the sanctuary's chief veterinarian kept her busy, especially as the heritage breed program expanded. In the months since El Corazon's death, she had dedicated herself to improving care standards for livestock throughout the region, sharing the lessons learned from the extraordinary bull. Later that evening, after completing her rounds, Emily returned to the memorial alone. The sanctuary had grown quiet, most staff having departed for the day. Stars punctuated the vast Texas sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. El Corazon's resting place was marked by a simple natural stone partially embedded in the earth beneath the spreading live oak. Unlike traditional markers, it bore no dates or elaborate epitaph, just his name and the words "He stayed," a tribute to his unwavering protection of the calves when he could have saved himself. Emily sat on the wooden bench beside the memorial, reflecting on the journey that had brought them all here. The bull's sacrifice had catalyzed change far beyond anything she could have imagined that day by the creek. Not only had he saved the calves, preserving a precious heritage bloodline, but his story had transformed the community's relationship with the animals in their care. "You know, I think you planned it all along," she said softly to the memorial. "Getting caught by us was your backup plan when you couldn't go any further. You made sure they'd be found by people who would help." The notion of such calculated foresight in a bull might seem far-fetched to some, but Emily had witnessed El Corazon's intelligence firsthand. Nothing about his extraordinary actions could be explained by ordinary animal behavior. A rustling sound from the nearby pasture caught her attention. Hope and Spirit had approached the fence closest to the memorial, watching her with alert interest despite the late hour. Emily smiled, crossing to greet them. "You two should be resting," she chided gently, reaching out to stroke their heads. Both calves had grown significantly in the past 6 months, developing the distinctive characteristics of their rare bloodline. Hope remained smaller than her brother, but her eyes held the same alert intelligence that had marked El Corazon. As Emily stood there, hand resting on Hope's forehead, she felt a profound sense of continuity. El Corazon was gone, but his legacy lived on, not just in these calves, but in the lessons his remarkable journey had taught them, all about courage, devotion, and the depths of animal consciousness. "Blood makes you related," Emily murmured, recalling Margaret's favorite saying, "but loyalty makes you family." By that measure, El Corazon had been more family to these calves than any biological relation could have been. He had chosen them, protected them, sacrificed for them, actions born not from instinct, but from something deeper. The sanctuary would continue to grow, preserving rare bloodlines and educating visitors about heritage breeds. Mason Powell's legal appeals would eventually exhaust themselves, justice having finally caught up to his decades of exploitation. Luis and his family would build a new legacy based on respect for the land and its creatures. All of these stories would unfold in the coming years, but none of it would have happened without a massive Brahman bull who defied every expectation, who demonstrated a capacity for selflessness that many humans would struggle to match. As Emily prepared to leave, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. At the base of El Corazon's memorial stone, partially hidden by growing grass, someone had placed a small carved wooden bull. The workmanship was exquisite, capturing the powerful stance and watchful gaze that had characterized El Corazon in life. Beside it lay a weathered leather collar, the one that had belonged to the calf's mother. Emily touched these tributes gently, recognizing Luisa's handiwork in the carving. No words needed to accompany these offerings. Their meaning was clear: remembrance, gratitude, acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid. "My grandpa used to say that the measure of any life ain't in what you gather," Margaret had told her once, "but in what you give away." By that standard, El Corazon's brief life had been immeasurable. Emily took one last look at the memorial before walking back toward the sanctuary buildings. The stars seemed especially bright tonight, the universe itself bearing witness to a simple truth: that love, whether human or animal, leaves marks on this world that endure long after we're gone. From their pasture, hope and spirit watched her go, their silhouettes framed against the night sky, living testaments to an extraordinary bond that had transcended nature's boundaries. In them, and in the sanctuary that had grown from their story, El Corazon's heart continued to beat. As an old Texas saying goes, "Ain't no night so dark that morning won't come." For Emily and the calves, that morning had arrived. A new day built on the foundation of one bull's remarkable courage and the profound difference a single life, lived with purpose, can make in this world. In the quiet moments of life, we sometimes witness extraordinary acts that remind us what truly matters. El Corazon's story touches something deep in our hearts: the understanding that love transcends boundaries we once thought fixed. This magnificent Brahman bull, who sacrificed everything to protect calves not his own, reminds us that the capacity for devotion exists in the most unexpected places. As we reflect on our own journeys, aren't these the lessons that resonate most? That family isn't always blood, that courage often comes without fanfare, and that our legacy lives in the lives we've touched rather than possessions we've gathered. Like Margaret's wisdom reminds us, blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Perhaps that's why this story feels so familiar to our souls. It echoes the choices we've made for those we love, the sacrifices that defined our lives, and the hope that what we've protected will thrive long after we're gone. What unexpected act of devotion has touched your life? Who has been your El Corazon, standing guard when storms gathered? Share your stories below, because in sharing them, these profound connections continue to live and breathe among us.